All right, my beautiful people, man. Good evening or good day, good evening, good afternoon. How are you guys doing? Thanks so much for joining us here on New Black Wall Street Book Club. As we're going to just keep on getting it, man. Black Fortune is what we're reading right now. We're into chapter 2 as we talk about the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. And I think this is a fitting book for such a time as this, because there are many of us who are still trying to escape some type of slavery, albeit mental slavery, financial slavery, emotional slavery, and you too can escape just like they did and get to a land of prosperity, a land flowing with milk and honey. It's been the same story, I believe, that's been recurring since the beginning of time. Escaping someplace that's not so equitable and getting to a place of prosperity. So while you guys are joining, go ahead and hit the like button, the share button. Then also, if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button so you know when we will go live. We do try to plan that in advance to give you ample time to make sure that you're here for the live experience if you like the live experience. Also, let us know what city, what state you're connecting from as well. Good evening to you, Ms. Vivian Reed. Thanks so much for joining. BBC is representing here from Brooklyn, New York. Hey, we're going to get right into this thing here today, my beautiful people, because we're not going to delay any time. I'm ready to read. Hopefully you are too. New Black Wall Street Book Club. Let's get it. You know what time it is, man. Mr. DJ, hit the music.
New Black Wall Street Book Club. Evan Jefferson, brother, much love. Educating, elevating, because in knowledge is the power and we'll never give it up. Literature's for the masses. Where to put your money down, now how to watch your assets. Yeah, uplifting others is a passion. My brother Evan, he will turn it into action. New Black Wall Street Book Club. You should come read with us. Yeah, we comprehend and discuss. If we all just come together, there's no limit for us. Here comes your host, New Black Wall Street. Evan, take it away.
What up, Darren?
New Black Wall Street Book Club.
All right, good evening to you, beautiful people. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the New Black Wall Street Book Club, where Black folk do read. And you put in a book, and we absolutely will find it. I'm your host, ERGJ, your certified financial educator and CEO of ERGJ Enterprises, ERGJ Black Bazaar, and international best-selling author of the book, The Black Billionaires Club. That book there is a study of Black wealth. It's a study of the 12 richest Black people in the world today and how they built their wealth. And I just truly believe that if you want to be wealthy, that's a big if, by the way. But if you do, I recommend that you start by studying wealthy people. Well, that study can begin for you by picking up the book, reading through it, learning what they've done to go from whatever state they started to billionaire status. And I believe that you'll be able to learn something that can help you get to where you want to be financially as well. You can find that book by simply going to the website, www.theblackbillionairesclub.com, www.theblackbillionairesclub.com. You'll find a link in the description above or below. And our sponsor for today, guys, is ERGJ Black Bazaar. Absolutely, the Afrocentric marketplace where they specialize in Afrocentric home decor, personal care products, and also Black art-inspired gifts. You can find them and go ahead and buy Black at ergjblackbazaar.com, www.ergjblackbazaar.com. Once you shop Black, beautiful people, you never go back. We're going to get right into this thing, man, as we start with our daily motivation for African-American success. This comes out of a book written by Mr. Dennis P. Kimbro, Daily Motivations for African-American Success. And today's title, Cross-Training. Today's title is Cross-Training. And our quote of today comes from a Reverend Calvin Butts. He's a pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. And it's just 2 words today. God is. Everybody put in the console, God is. God is. Well, let's find out a little bit about cross-training here today as we get into our passage of the day. Let's read. It was written, he has achieved success who has lived long, laughed often, and loved much, who has gained the trust of pure women, the respect of intelligent men, and the love of little children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his task, who has left the world better than he found it, whether by an improved copy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has always appreciated Earth's beauty and never failed to express it, who has always looked for the best in others and always given the best he had, whose life was an inspiration, whose memory a benediction. This moving statement, besides providing a spirit-filled soliloquy, sets the stage for the following story. Several years ago, a child wanted to enter a Sunday school class in Philadelphia, but was told there was not enough room. She began saving her pennies to help the church build a bigger class. 2 years later, the girl became ill and died. Family and friends who cleaned out her belongings found a small book under her pillow. Within the book were 57 pennies and a piece of paper that read, "To help build the little temple bigger, so more children can go to Sunday school." One Sunday, the pastor told the story to his congregation, and a newspaper picked up the lead. The story soon spread across the country. Soon, the pennies grew, and the outcome can be seen in Philadelphia today. Thanks to a little girl's tiny seed, there's a church that seats nearly 4,000 members. Thanks to her humble efforts, Temple University was founded. And thanks to her mighty gift, the Temple Sunday School was constructed. And it all began with a tiny child who wanted to make the world a better place for others. Temple University. It all began with a child who wanted to make the world a better place for others. And here's today's affirmation, guys. Here's what will allow to take root into our subconscious and then we can actually grow and develop it by repeating it over and over and over again until it brings forth a harvest into your life. Repeat after me. Today, I will make a contribution to help make this world a better place to live. Again, today, I will make a contribution to help make this world a better place to live. Let's do it one more time, people. This time for the people in the back. This time, say it with some conviction like you really mean it. Repeat after me. Today, I will make a contribution to help make this world a better place to live. Cross Training Daily Motivations for African American Success by Mr. Dennis P. Kimbro. Daily Motivations for African American Success by Mr. Dennis P. Kimbro. Well, my beautiful people, that's our appetizer, our affirmation appetizer. Now we got to get into the meat of what we're discussing here today as we continue along in our journey into Black Fortunes. Now, Black Fortunes is the story of the first 6 African Americans to escape slavery and become millionaires. It's a story of the first 6 African Americans to escape slavery and become millionaires. So we're going to pick up in chapter 2, and we'll get through chapter 2 today. It's not very long, and so we'll be able to get through this today as we continue along our journey into Black Fortunes. So chapter 2, part 1, let's read. The title is, chapter 2 is King Cotton's Bastard. King Cotton's Bastard. Starts the story off in 1844. Everybody put it down on 1844. The Mississippi Delta. 1844, the Mississippi Delta. Let's read. Inside a church made of laid stone and canopied by trees of a clearing in the woodlands of Arkansas, an enslaved woman named Emmeline was summoned to the front of the congregation to undergo a confirmation ceremony. She was purportedly the first enslaved person to undergo the ritual in the state. The faces of the congregants at the Episcopal Church of Arkansas were of slave-owning families from the cotton plantations of the western part of the state. They watched with absorption as she marched to the front of the congregation. Not only would Emmeline confirm her faith, but she would also join slave-owning men and women as a member of the congregation and a sister in Christ. Emmeline was a fair-skinned Black woman, described as the most beautiful type of Creole. She was unmarried and had 2 children by 2 different men. That couldn't be held against her, as her body had been sold and rented out at various points by the family who owned her, who claimed that she lived the most Christian life of anyone we ever met. The confirmation ceremony consisted of a series of questions about accepting Christ and renouncing evil, which had to be answered affirmatively. It ended with prayers and the laying on of hands. Emmeline's ceremony was presided over by Bishop George Washington Freeman, a stoic man who dressed in gray vests and jackets with a preacher's collar on his shirt. He put his hands on Emmeline's head and shoulders and prayed over her as amens arose from the congregation. With this sacrament, she hoped a place will be prepared for her in heaven. She was near the end of her life, and she was getting her affairs into order. Emmeline was on borrowed time. At nearly 40 years of age, she had surpassed the normal life expectancy for an enslaved person and had lived a long life for her era. In the 1850s, the average lifespan of enslaved African Americans was between 22 and 36 years old. Between tetanus contracted from the rusted farm equipment, food and waterborne illnesses, sexually transmitted infections, disease-carrying mosquitoes, and hemorrhaging childbirths, enslaved people were considered lucky to reach their 30th year. Emmeline has survived dozens of outbreaks of cholera, malaria, and yellow fever in a mosquito-infested backwater of the Mississippi Delta. She had survived the doctorless births of 2 sons, but now she was waning. And as the year 1851 dawned on the plantation where she lived near the Arkansas-Tennessee state line, she considered that she had entered the final stretch of her life. She had lived in one form or another of bondage since birth, and she hoped that before she joined her lords of lords and her ancestors in the afterlife, she could secure freedom of her children. Robert Reed Church and James Winston. Robert Reed Church and James Winston. So those are the 2 children from Miss Emmeline. If she her last dying wish that she's as she's on her last leg is to secure freedom of her children. Emmeline was born on a tobacco plantation outside Norfolk, Virginia. Her exact birth date was never recorded, but she was told she had been born about the year 1815. Her mother was an enslaved woman named Lucy. When Lucy was first sold as a girl on a slave auction block in Virginia, the slave seller claimed she was a tribal princess who had been taken from the island of Hispaniola. The rumor of royal blood would become family lore. Whether or not it was true, Lucy and her descendants would always believe they were from royalty despite their station as chattel. For the first years of her life, Emmeline lived with her mother on the plantation in Lynchburg, Virginia, owned by a doctor named Philip Burton. When she was a small girl, Dr. Burton gave her as a gift to his youngest daughter, Rosalie Virginia Burton. A few years later, the Burton family sold off her mother, Lucy, to a planter in Natchez, Mississippi, along with 99 other slaves for more than $85,000 or $1.7 million. Emmeline's mother was sold away so early in life that Emmeline couldn't remember much about her. Rosalie, her owner, was the closest thing she had to a family for the most of her life. Emmeline and Rosalie were more the order of sisters than mistress and maid, the family that owned her claimed. When Emmeline reached womanhood, Rosalie transferred the rights to her to a white businessman from Memphis who had taken an interest in her. Captain Charles B. Church was a married man and spent most of his time away on the Mississippi River, where he commanded a fleet of steamships. Emmeline would serve as his concubine while continuing to reside with Rosalie. Captain Church would send for Emmeline when he wanted her. In 1839, their tryst produced a son, Robert Reed Church, whom everyone called Bob, was born June 18, 1839, on a cotton plantation outside Memphis, Tennessee. Captain Church fathered several white children with his wife, Mary Church, but Bob was his healthiest offspring. His only white children to live past infancy were Molly Church, a deaf mute, and Charles Church Jr., who was sickly. A few years later, Bob was born. Emmeline conceived another son, a boy, whom she named James Wilson. James was not Captain Church's son, however. which was obvious from his blonde hair and fair skin. Captain Church was a dark-featured, dark-haired white man. In her final days, Emmeline underwent confirmation and brokered deals for her sons to be set free after she died. James, the younger of her boys, had blue eyes. He could pass for a white boy without much difficulty. He was described as being as perfect a specimen of the Caucasian as could be found anywhere in the world. Emmeline planned for James to live with Rosalie after she died. Rosalie promised to pass him off as one of her own kin. Robert, on the other hand, had fair skin, narrow dark eyes, and wavy dark hair. And though he had very little African blood, he could not have passed for white as easily as his younger brother. Emmeline had to work out a different arrangement for him. One day, as her health was declining, Captain Church called on Emmeline. When they were in her quarters, she pleaded with him to free their son, Robert, upon death, and send him to a school for colored children in Cincinnati. Captain Church agreed, setting her mind at ease. In 1851, Emmeline finally passed away on Rosalie's plantation. In her last month, she hoped that her soul was bound for heaven and her sons would grow up free. Her death left her sons without a mother and crushed Rosalie. I could never see as much sunshine in the after, she said. Not long after Emmeline was buried, a horse-drawn carriage arrived on Rosalie's estate. The buggy carried Captain Charles Church, a 39-year-old white man of large stature. Church had tan skin and dark hair that he had wore parted at the side and tucked behind his ears. His face was round and boyish with small blue eyes and a downturned mouth. He wore expensive suits with ties knotted into a stubby bow around his collar. As a boy growing up in Ohio, he had become fascinated with the work of Robert Fulton, the developer of a commercially successful steamboat, and taken to the river. He skipped his later years of schooling to work in the machine rooms on steamboats and taught himself engineering and sailing. In a few years, he worked his way up the rank of captain. Now he was successful and wealthy and owned a steamboat line, multiple properties, and several slaves. His purpose in going to Rosalie's estate was clear. He had come to the estate to take Robert away. Robert was 12 years old when Captain Church came for him. He packed his things, said goodbye to his younger brother James, and boarded his father's carriage. They departed down a dirt road, rolling through acres of cotton fields, leaving the life he knew behind. Reflecting on Robert's departure, Rosalie later lamented, "My love for your mother endeared her little ones to me. I never intended to hold them in bondage, but your father promised your mother he will put you in school and educate you." Captain Church had no intention of putting Bob in school. He told him he was taking him to Memphis to put him to work aboard a steamship. There were several factors that could have influenced his rationale in breaking this promise to Robert's mother. First, he was a slaveholder. He owned at least half a dozen slaves, several of whom he used as workers on his boat. He lived in Memphis, a town of cotton warehouses, storefronts, and mansions built around 4 town squares named Market, Court, Auction, and Exchange, where slave traders held regular auctions. A boy Robert's age went for as much as $650 or $19,000 today's term. And at the slave auction in Court Park near Captain Church's residence. Perhaps he decided his black son would be safest where he could keep an eye on him. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1852 empowered slave traders to capture free African Americans and enslave them with or often without proof that they had ever been enslaved. It is also possible he may have wanted Robert to be with him, his desire to leave a legacy. He had given his white son Charles Jr. his name, but he knew it was unlikely that the sickly boy would ever follow in his footsteps on the river. Some part of him may have hoped that the strong black son whom he had given the first name of his hero, Robert Fulton, and his own last name would follow in his footsteps, even if he knew it was unlikely that a black boy could ever be a captain, or that the two of them could ever live openly as father and son. Whatever his reasons were for putting him to work, Robert had no choice in the matter. Robert was excited when he learned that he was going to Memphis. Captain Church had taken him there once years before. Robert recalled how thrilled he had been to see the hustle and bustle of the big city and looked forward to seeing it again. Robert's mother had been a house slave all her life, serving as an assistant and seamstress to Rosalie and a concubine to Captain Church. In the world Robert knew, Black people could not rise past servitude. In the world that Robert knew, Black folk could not rise past servitude. Now think about that for a second. Growing up as a young boy, I guess now 12 years old, all he's ever seen is Black folk being slaves, and that's all he knew. And he didn't think that there was anything else other than for Black folk to do but be slaves. Now that's that's pretty sad, but there's still some people today who still feel that same way, and they're Black, and still feel like, man, this is about as high as we can go. Stinking thinking, I tell you that. But that's all he knew. A life working on steamships was certainly at least as good as, if not better than, anything that awaited him on the plantation he'd left. When Robert and Captain Church got close to the riverbank in Arkansas, they could see Memphis across the Mississippi River. They caught a ferry across the river and arrived at the Memphis Wharf, a clearing on a port of the shore that curved in and created a natural harbor. Their ships arrived and departed carrying passengers and cargo. The wharf was alive and with activity as dock workers and sailors scuttled among dozens of steamships tied to the pier at the river's edge. Jugglers and newspaper boys caught the attention of travelers coming and going from the pier. This was Robert's new home. Captain Church operated a line of steamships at the Memphis Wharf, and Robert was to work and live on his vessels. He was given a job as a cabin boy on Captain Church's ships. Every day, he helped the cook in the kitchen and took the officers on the ship their meals. He was also a messenger for the crew, sprinting from one end of the ship to the other to relay instructions, messages, and even jokes between the men. Captain Church's ships were described by one customer as floating palaces. The ships chugged up and down the Mississippi, churning the river as their paddle wheels spun and splashed, powered by a steam engine housing a boiler in the center of the ship with a chimney extending from it. Travelers spent their time in expensive salons with cut glass chandeliers and draperies made of scarlet velvet and thickly woven silk. The window frames and doors were finished with gold-painted woodwork. The rooms were filled with easy chairs and sofas. There was a band playing at either end of the boat. The passengers on Captain Church's steamboats were cotton planters, wealthy families on holiday, as well as gamblers. Most of them were intrigued by the presence of a child on the boat. Often they engaged Robert in conversation to pass the time or asked him to run errands in exchange for hefty tips. In the dining room, Robert scurried about, following orders from the waiters and kitchen staff as they served fine cuts of meat with fresh vegetables, fruit, and cakes on china with sterling silver cutlery. The glasses of the travelers were kept full of cherry wine and mint julep. Passengers looked on jealously at those who were chosen to eat with Captain Church at the captain's table, where he would regale his dinner guests with stories of the river and his travels. The captain seemed to be in multiple places at once, moving between the pilot house and the parlor. Robert caught glimpses of him charming his passengers with his sparkling blue eyes. He seemed to know each passenger by name, greeting each like an old friend. Though Captain Church enjoyed transporting travelers up and down the river, his main source of income was transporting cotton. He transported thousands of bales of cotton at a time, stacked like bricks on the decks of the ship. Sometimes the deck was packed so full, passengers could barely find a spot to stand on if they tried to venture out of the interior of the ship onto the deck. Cotton shippers like Captain Church were part of the global supply of cotton fiber. Cotton was planted, harvested, ginned, and baled into parcels by enslaved African Americans on plantations in the Mississippi Delta. From there, thousands of bales of cotton were loaded onto carts pulled by horses and donkeys and taken to a port along the Mississippi, where it was then loaded into steamboats and transported to warehouses in Mississippi River towns or to St. Louis or the ports of New Orleans. From the port of New Orleans or St. Louis, it was then shipped via the Atlantic Ocean to factories in New York, Massachusetts, and Manchester, England, where it was spun and woven into textiles. Cotton fiber, an industry worth $100 million a year, or $20 billion in today's terms, was the United States' top export and made up 60% of the gross domestic product. United States' second largest and England's biggest industry, textile production, depended on cotton, which is much cheaper than wool or silk. Wall Street fed tens of millions of dollars on financing into cotton growing. Planters often put up the people they enslaved as collateral to secure loans. By 1851, cotton had become so profitable that Natchez, Mississippi, the cotton growing capital of the world, was home to half of the millionaires in the United States, and per capita had the most millionaires of any town in the world, beating out New York City, Paris, and London. Robert's grandmother had been enslaved to a planter in Natchez. Robert got along well with the adults who worked for his father aboard the ship, who seemed to take pity on him. The chambermaids mothered him, and he roughed houses and played pranks with men on the ship. I remember your childhood capers, Kinder Blair, an Irishman whom his father employed as pastry chef, recall. All of us men used to play tricks on each other. We worked hard, but we enjoyed ourselves. Captain Church understood that Robert was a boy among men on the ship and kept an eye on him and offered him guidance. Don't let anyone call you a nigger, he told him. Fight if necessary to protect yourself against such insults. He told Bob how to defend himself. Tell him if someone strikes you, hit him back, and I'll back you. He urged me never to be a coward. Robert remembered of his father's advice on the river. Although Captain Church never allowed Robert to refer to him as his father, he did show him affection. Once he took his son into a photographer's studio so they could get their picture taken together. For the occasion, the captain purchased matching outfits. The outfits were Knights Templar costumes, consisting of dark-colored pants and a jacket with a matching hat and sash. The hat had frills above the brim. In the matching costumes, Robert and his father looked almost identical. After a few months on the river, the excitement of it all began to fade, and Robert felt alone. He was the only boy on the boat and never saw any other children. His mother was gone, and he missed his younger brother, James, but none of that could be helped. The Mississippi was his home now. The Mississippi was his home now. So this first part, guys, of chapter 2, we're talking about King Cotton's bastard, is really getting us to Robert Reed Church. We find out about his mom and how he was raised and what his mother went through as she looked to make sure that her sons, including Robert, were free men. And in her being sold off to be the concubine of the Captain Church, she had a baby, and that baby, one of those children, was Robert Reed Church. And so lo and behold, after his mother passed away, the Captain Church came back to get his son, which is admirable, especially during this time. We're talking about a white man who was a slave owner and he had multiple businesses. He still came back to get his son. I find that very admirable. And although we can talk about him being a slave owner, during that time it was okay. During that time it was legal. During that time, that's what it was expected of the white man for them to have some type of success or to build wealth. So, but for him to come back for his black son that he had out of wedlock, right? He had it with a whore or his concubine. I actually can applaud that because he still wanted to protect him, although he was a black baby, right? He was my dark son. But guess what? He was still his son. So now he's on the boat, and he's just, a worker, the youngest on the boat, the darkest on the boat, the only child on the boat, and he's learning some lessons from the other men that are there, the adults that are there, and I guess we're going to find out more about Mr. Robert Reed Church as he's developing here on the Mississippi River. So, Chapter 2, the King Cotton's Bastard, Part 2. So on March 22nd, 1855, Captain Church's steamship, Bulletin No. 2, was docked in Memphis, readying a large shipment of cotton. As the crew prepared the vessel to sail down the Mississippi, slaves in linen shirts and straw hats rolled bales of the cotton up the gangplank onto the boat and stacked them in 6-foot-high piles on the deck. Robert was 16 years old and worked as the dishwasher on Bulletin No. 2. He had grown tall and had slick black hair, a straight nose, and a cleft chin. His eyes were small, dark, and piercing. He had taught himself to read. He taught himself to read. He had taught himself to read by collecting the discarded newspapers passengers left behind. He had not learned how to write, but he could sign his name, Robert R. Church, with looping strokes. The newspapers the customers left scattered about the cabin that day carried news of the construction of a locomotive line in Memphis that could carry passengers to the gold rush in California when it was finished. That evening, bulletin number 2 was destined for Vicksburg, Mississippi, a cotton depot between Memphis and New Orleans. Men in top hats and suits and women in colorful dresses and skirts boarded bulletin number 2, alongside his crew, making their way around the piles of cotton on the deck and into the cabin house. In the kitchen, Bob prepared for the dinner service that evening. Just before sunset, bulletin number 2 set sail for the 3-day voyage with 55 passengers, more than 60 crew, and over 35,000 bales of cotton that valued at more than $100,000 or $2.6 million in today's terms. On the second day of the journey, as the ship neared Transylvania, Louisiana, Robert was in the kitchen preparing to play a practical joke. He hid in the kitchen as a crew member came ambling in with a tall stack of dirty plates. He then jumped out and threw a handful of paprika onto the stove in front of the man, hoping to make the open flame flare up and startle him. He scurried out of the kitchen and shut the door behind him. As he listened by the door, he heard someone in the front of the ship yell, "Fire!" Uh-oh. Fire! While Robert was playing his prank in the kitchen, a few passengers had made their way out of the deck to smoke and get some fresh air. As they chatted and puffed cigars, an ember carried by the wind landed on one of the many bales of cotton stacked near them. When Robert ran to the deck and saw several bales of cotton on fire, the crew grabbed buckets and threw water on the cotton, but the blaze spread faster than they could haul water. And before long, the whole boat seemed to be on fire. Captain Church had neglected to equip the ship with a working water pump and fire hose, and fighting the fire without them was a losing effort. Captain Church appeared on the dock. "Run the boat aground," he commanded the ship's pilots. The ship steered toward the riverbank. When the boat arrived at the shore, the crew fastened it to the bank with a rope. Robert then went to the aid of the women, helping them off the ship and onto the shore. Once all the female passengers were on land, he ran around to the other side of the boat, where he ran into the captain, who was supervising as his men pushed the flaming cotton bales off the boat and into the river. Captain Church noticed one passenger still on board. The man was standing in the cabin calmly looking out at the flames around him. "Save yourself," the captain told him. "Make yourself easy, Captain," the passenger replied as the flames smoldered around him. Out of the corner of his eye, Bob noticed that one of the flaming bales had been pushed overboard, was floating back onto the river toward the shore, near the rope that was anchoring the boat. Before he could react, the bale brushed the rope and set it aflame. The burning twine eventually snapped, and one of the crew members grabbed it, straining to hold the ship to the shore with brute strength. Bob jumped off the boat and swam to the bank. The man finally lost his grip on the rope, and the boat began drifting from the bank with most of the crew still aboard. As the boat floated further and further from shore, Captain Church yelled for everyone aboard to jump ship and grab a floating bale of cotton. They jumped into the river and grabbed bales, which they used as floats. A few of the chambermaids used their hoop skirts to float on the river. The skirts were held into a fashionable shape with a scaffolding that projected the fabric away from their legs, and in the water, the open-out skirts acted as flotation devices. In a matter of minutes, the boat was engulfed in flames and had drifted more than 200 feet from the bank into the river. The man who had been standing in the cabin among the flames at last came out of the deck. He turned to Captain Church, said, "Now, gallows, save your own," and leaped from the boat into the water. Captain Church remained on the boat with 4 of his other slaves and worked to help those remaining on board. The boat continued to drift into the river until he gave up and jumped. He left 4 of his slaves behind in the flames. They, along with 21 other people, died in the fire that night. Bob watched from the bank as bulletin number 2 burned and then finally sank into the Mississippi. He hoped, perhaps for the first time, to escape life as his father's slave on the river. He hoped, perhaps for the first time, to escape life as his father's slave on the river. Oh, okay. So, and that's actually it, guys. That's that's the end of this chapter. They got some interesting endings. So the burning of the boat, it looks like it's going to actually give Robert or Bob an opportunity to actually start life in this new place without being a slave. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't know. We got to catch up on it on the next episode, but it looks like this was a blessing in disguise. Although he started the fire, I guess he started the fire. And the boats burn. Now they're on some island or some space, some shore, and I think it may give him an opportunity to get started with life without being his father's slave. I guess he's about to be free. I guess that's how that happened. I don't know. I mean, well, who gonna catch him? He gonna get the hell on. I guess he gonna get the hell on. I don't know. But yeah, Black Fortune. So we're getting into the beginning of the story of Robert Reed Church, who is going to be the second of the 6 African Americans who escaped slavery. So I guess the burning of the boat is his escaping slavery, and the escape. And here's the interesting part: the escaping slavery for him is going to be escaping his father's slavery. Now, can you imagine? Right now, although I think the father loved him, or I don't know, that's just odd, right? Like, I'm just trying to picture that. Like, I'm a slave owner, but I care enough to come get you. So at least if you're gonna be somebody's slave, you're gonna be my slave. But you're still a slave. But I just happen to be your father. So you get treated a little, so I guess it's like, you get treated a little bit better, maybe. This is just weird. This is just weird. Okay, this is just weird. On equal footing, I guess we'll find out on the next episode. So that's part 2 of chapter 2. As we're talking about King Cotton's Bastard. And obviously we're talking about Robert Reed Church, whose mother passed away, and he was left with his father, who was a slave owner, white man, and his father cared about him enough, I guess, to bring him on the ship and watch after him, although he still was a slave. It's weird just by wrapping my head around this. But this is back in 1844. He's still a slave. Okay, he's still a slave. And this is back in 1844, 1850. So just imagine what we're talking about, a time frame. So yeah, so we're gonna pick up next episode as we continue to go through the book Black Fortunes, which is the story of the first 6 African Americans to escape slavery. So maybe this is his way of escaping slavery. I don't know, but we'll find out more next episode. This is the New Black Wall Street Book Club, where Black folk do read. You put in a book like Black Fortunes, the story of the first 6 African Americans to escape slavery and become millionaires by Mr. Shomari Wills. You put in a book like Daily Motivations for African American Success by Mr. Dennis P. Kimbro, and we absolutely will find it. I'm your host, ERGJ, CEO of ERGJ Enterprise. We invite you not only to pick up the book, as I mentioned to you earlier, the Black Billionaires Club, we actually invite you to go to the website and consider joining the club. That's right. There we have personal development to help you become the best version of you that you can be. We have business development to help you start that business or expand the current business that you have to scale, to go from small business to big business. We also have financial education to teach you about money. Too many of us do not know about money. And for some strange reason, we're hoping and praying that they put it into the school system to teach us. That's not going to happen. Okay, that's not going to happen. If they teach us about money, it's going to be about over. But we can teach ourselves. Just like he taught himself to read, we can teach ourselves about money. And last but not least, we have investment education to teach you and give you an opportunity to make your money work harder for you than you work for it. Go to the website, theblackbillionairesclub.com. Check out, join the club, and read and make a decision that can change your life forever. Well, beautiful people, I want to say thanks so much to our sponsor, ERGJ Black Bazaar, the Afrocentric Marketplace, or where they specialize in Afrocentric home decor, personal care products, and then also Black art-inspired gifts. Check them out at www.ergjblackbazaar.com, www.ergjblackbazaar.com. Well, beautiful people, I want you to remember this, that it takes a village. It starts with us. Let's build as we climb together. We all we got, people. Matter of fact, we all we need. And thank God, that's more than enough. Until next episode, you know what time it is. Mr. DJ, hit the music.
New black. It's the New Black Wall Street Book Club. Wall Street. With your host, Evan Jefferson. It's time for us to go. Yeah. Now, you ain't got to leave the computer, but we encourage you to get out there and learn and apply all the things you learn at the New Black Wall Street Book Club. Yeah. The New Black Wall Street.